being value driven is really important. And I actually think it's something we should put more energy into discovering when we're young, because
Mhm.
chances are our values, if we're true to ourselves, our values won't change very much.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that it can be that thread of continuity that you need when you're going through transition.
100%. 100%. And that was a big part of what we did in the work that I worked with women on is really getting clear on your values because those are your, guardrails. So when you come up against something, and what starts to happen that's really fascinating is as you spend more time understanding who you are, learning what your values are, what's important to you, you start to notice that you become more self-aware of how things feel. Like, well, that doesn't feel right. What's going on there? And you start to peel back the layers to explore that. Or, that doesn't, something's wrong here. I don't want to participate in that because that's not in alignment with my values. And I am not willing to sacrifice that part of me that's really important to participate in that.
Bridget Beldin has been through more than a few bumps in the road. Perhaps most significantly was her midlife bump, where she found herself at odds with her life and with her marriage. In time, she figured that out and has since redirected her energy towards a path with meaning. Today, she helps other women navigate the empty nest midlife scenario with heart and with purpose. She has much to teach and much to share. Please welcome her to Bump in the Road. Bridget, welcome to Bump in the Road. If you would, tell us your story.
My story, I'm going to go back a little ways. I was a young woman who was very focused on my future. I went to a good school. I got a good job. I met and married my husband. We had two beautiful kids. I had a boy and a girl, living the quote unquote American dream. And I got to a point, probably in my early to mid 30s, where I had achieved everything that was on my list, including having a Volvo station wagon, which I literally wrote in my journal. I know I will have made it when I have a Volvo station wagon. So I had all these things, and yet I got to this point and I realized that there was something missing for me. And I had this kind of a hole inside because I didn't realize I was so focused on the outward accomplishments and acquisitions. Of course, I loved my family dearly. But I didn't know who I was. I totally lost track. And I'm not sure I ever really knew, honestly. I think I was just kind of marching along one foot after the other until I got to the end and I just went, wow, okay, so this is it. What else is there? And that led me down first I tried denial, shoving it down. This isn't existing. This doesn't happen. I'm fine. That didn't work. And I had a lot of shame around my feelings because I felt like this is everything I've ever wanted. And I love my family. So why am I not happy? There's something wrong with me. And I thought that I was really embarrassed. I didn't want to talk to anybody about it. And this was in the days before social media, which I think is really a blessing because had I been looking at everybody else living their perfect lives, I would have really thought there was something wrong with me. But on the flip side of that, there was no conversation about mental illness. There was no conversation about seeing a therapist. There was no conversation about what happens when you're not happy with this life that you created. And so I carried that around with me for a long time until I couldn't anymore. My husband and I weren't getting along very well he was completely surprised by the fact that I said, I don't know what's wrong. I can now look back and articulate it, but then I had no idea. And so we were struggling. I was a lot less like I said, articulate and emotionally connected to what was happening. And we really struggled. And I eventually thought, okay, I am very committed to figuring this out because I really want to understand why I am here, what my gifts are, my purpose is. And after a period of time, I ended up, at one point, almost losing my marriage over this. That's how committed I was. And I was so worried about the kids because they were itty bitties. Will they ever understand what I'm going through? But there was just this internal drive that voice that told me, you have to figure this out. Like there is no other option for you. So I did. And over a period of time, thankfully, my husband and I were able to work things out. We went through some education classes that really helped us. And we both went into it thinking that we were getting a divorce. So we just kind of went in, we have to have this relationship because of the kids. And we came out of it, 72 hours later going, wow, maybe there is an opportunity here for us to converse differently, to understand each other differently. And from that point on, we were able to kind of slowly build the pieces back. I was working up in Los Angeles for an apparel manufacturer. I was in manufacturing and retail was my career path at the time. And I was living in Orange County, so I was commuting quite a long ways. And one of the things I said when my husband and I sat down to say, okay, how do we create a life that we're happy with? And it involved me not having to make that drive anymore. I wanted to be home closer to the kids. I wanted to have some kind of work, but I just didn't want to be gone as much as I was. So we kind of worked through that. And ultimately, I ended up finding I founded a nonprofit called Ripple Kids. And I found that I was so inspired by young people who were able to identify an issue they saw in their communities and articulate a solution. And that felt something that was totally out of my grasp. I was so inspired by that. I thought, what would happen if I was able to share these stories? And so ultimately left my job, started this journey down a nonprofit path, ran that for about 10 years, probably 15 unofficially. Never made a cent in terms of you know, pay or salary. Thankfully, I was in a place where we could afford to do that. But it was the most passionate I had ever felt about something in my life. I was able to participate in these organizational activities with my children by my side, with my husband by my side, these different events that we did. I was able to push some edges for myself in terms of, starting a business and kind of fueling that entrepreneurial fire. It was really the first time I had ever felt that much gratification and satisfaction from something that was also making a difference in the world. And so I had always, as I had gone through that, wanted to share my story about that journey with women, but I didn't really know what that was going to look like. And so the year the nonprofit turned 10, I turned 50, my husband turned 60, and our youngest was going off to college. And it felt like a very tidy time to kind of put a bow on the nonprofit and start looking at what the next step might look like. And so eventually I got into coaching and started working with women who are in midlife, exploring that transition that happens as your kids leave for college and or leave the house, and you're really left with who am I beyond all of this? And I think the difference is for me is that I experienced it much earlier than a lot of my midlife empty nester friends and people that I was, now communing with at that level. And I did that I've been doing that for about six years. I started just before COVID, and then we had the shutdown, did it all by Zoom, built a business, really enjoyed, it's very gratifying working with women and helping them discover who they are beyond being a mom, to discover what their path is, to really start to believe in themselves again as independent souls who are here for a larger purpose. And again, not to take anything away from motherhood. Some of the women I worked with were very, very focused on motherhood. That was all they ever really wanted. And then when their children went off, they were kind of left with, okay, now what? So it was very, very gratifying work for sure. That's my story. What happens next is another story. So
Well, are there some foundational guideposts that you've come across in helping people navigate such uncertain terrain? Because I think you go through a number of really profound changes like this in life. Certainly, when you're out of school and you're getting into the workforce, perhaps you marry, become a parent. Certainly, midlife is a key piece. There's
Mhm.
also another one, I think, when people go to retire that they're utterly unprepared for. And I'm not 70 yet, so I'm sure when I get to my 70s, I'll come up with some new guideposts that need attention. But what are some of the things that you found that are true across all your clients?
Well, it's interesting you ask that question because, I started out being very, very focused on empty nesters, what happens when the kids leave the nest. And as I worked with more and more women, I recognized that this is but one of the many transitions that happens, all the ones that you mentioned, retirement, taking care of aging parents, loss, retire, like all the things that happen within this chapter of life. And I think probably the common thread is really coming back to who you are as a person because it allows you, and that was a large part of the work that I did, was really discovering, just like I did, who I was, what was important to me, what are my values, what am I passionate about, trying to understand a little bit more about why I'm here and what I have to offer. Because once you have that groundedness and that centeredness in yourself, then all of these roles and everything that you take on, whether it's being a mom or a CEO or a wife or a daughter-in-law, all these, or a caregiver, they are, when you bring yourself to each of those, you're able to stay much more centered and come back to who you are. I don't know if that makes sense. So rather than being, pulled as a mom and identifying purely as that, I am, most days, I am Bridget who has young adult children, and my values don't change. Who I am doesn't change. How I engage with them, might change depending on their circumstances. But rather than getting, as your kids get older, there's different things to worry about. And rather than getting sucked up into, oh my God, the latest trauma, or the latest thing that they're dealing with, I can come back and find myself back centered, being able to help them from that place. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's about, really acknowledging and recognizing how to cultivate peace within yourself. And I've found that there is a tremendous amount of peace to be found when I feel like I am operating in alignment with my values, what's important to me, how I want to show up in the world. All of those things help keep me grounded and centered so I don't get sucked up into the chaos that's going on around me.
Now, I think being value driven is really important. And I actually think it's something we should put more energy into discovering when we're young, because
Mhm.
chances are our values, if we're true to ourselves, our values won't change very much.
Yep, absolutely.
And that it can be that thread of continuity that you need when you're going through transition.
100%. 100%. And that was a big part of what we did in the work that I worked with women on is really getting clear on your values because those are your, guardrails. So when you come up against something, and what starts to happen that's really fascinating is as you spend more time understanding who you are, learning what your values are, what's important to you, you start to notice that you become more self-aware of how things feel. Like well, that doesn't feel right. What's going on there? And you start to peel back the layers to explore that. Or, that doesn't something's wrong here. I don't want to participate in that because that's not in alignment with my values, and I am not willing to sacrifice that part of me that's really important to participate in that. For example, gossip. Gossip for me is like, thankfully, I'm not around people who gossip anymore. But when the kids were younger, it's that yucky feeling you get, when it's there's no good that comes of it. So you start getting a better sense of, whoa, 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 that doesn't feel right. How do I get back in my lane and get back in alignment? So the values are very important to kind of be those guardrails and to keep you on track, I think, and in alignment.
When you talk about being uncomfortable with some circumstances, that kind of goes to intuition, which aligns with your values. Because when I think back, in all the intuitive decisions you've made,
Hmm.
have you regretted any of those?
No.
No. But the decisions you make that were against your intuition, they never turn out, do they?
They don't. And I think the important thing, another thing that, I really learned and that I've supported women on this journey is to learn to listen because that voice is there. that knowing is there, but we tend to get so caught up in being busy and drowning it out that we're not listening to it. And so a big part of the work is learning how to be still, learning how to sit and, either journal or just one of my favorite things to do is to sit out in the backyard and watch the birds. I mean, that for me is meditation in and of itself. And it really kind of grounds me and centers me, and it brings me a tremendous amount of joy. It allows me, my brain kind of, I start thinking, I start creating, I start thinking of things and then writing them down. And so those intuitive hits come when we allow the space for them to show up and we don't drown them out. And I think one of the really important things to remember is that as you become more um, practiced in this, that when those hits happen is to record them, whatever it looks like. I pick up my phone and I think I have, I don't know how many pages of voice notes I have of something that hits me, because those are the clues that will help guide you to what's next, or an answer to a question you've been asking, or I mean, everything lies within that. There's a lot of value there.
I think part of change is it's getting out of your comfort zone, which for some people is really hard.
Mm.
How are there steps to getting out of your comfort zone?
Okay, first of all, I just want to acknowledge that it can be absolutely terrifying, and that fear is meant to keep us safe, right? And so, whether it shows up as a voice in your head, I have a couple of voices in my head that keep me from doing things. But acknowledging that, once upon a time, that fear was meant to keep us safe, and that when we are looking at doing something that feels a little scary, where your palms start to sweat and the hair stands up and you get that feeling in your stomach, that is a clue that is where you should actually lean in and get more curious about it. I can say without a doubt that I would not be here today had I not continued to kind of push my comfort zone gradually. We all have edges, and they're different for everybody. One of the things that I still struggle with today is, when I'm seated at a table in a restaurant and they take me to, the table by the kitchen or whatever, unless it's really bad, I'll look at it and I think, oh, I don't want to sit here for whatever reason, but then I sit, right? And I have friends that I tell that story and they're like, what are you talking about? All you have to do is ask for a different table. But for me, that is, that's an edge. And so it might be asking for what you need in an instant where you feel like, okay, I'm really laying it all on the line here. And then, the waiter shows you, oh, yes, absolutely. We'll take you to this table over here. And then you're kind of like, okay, it feels good. And that's your edge expanding just a little bit more. So I think it's thinking about, it doesn't have to be, sitting from where you are right now and going, I'm going to start a new company, right? It took me so many little steps. Each of them were kind of scary for me to get to a point where I wanted to start my nonprofit. And filing the paperwork was a huge one for me. And that voice in my head was, who do you think you are? You're not an entrepreneur. Why are you going to do a nonprofit? It'll never be successful. All those voices that you overcome. And the more you test those, you start realizing that you're more powerful than you ever thought you were. So I would say there's a great book called The War of Art, The Art of War, The War of Art by, I think it's Stephen Pressfield. And he has a quote in there that basically said, fear is an indicator. And that tells us where we need to lean in, because that means that you're onto something, you know?
That's interesting. I
Yeah.
think whatever emotions you have outside your comfort zone are giving you some feedback. And personally, I think we all need to learn to live out of our comfort zone more often,
Mhm.
because that's where the magic happens. If you're
100%.
fearful, you're going to be really present moment.
Hmm.
And that is where you create, because you don't create in the past, you don't create in the future. You create here and now. And I think ultimately what people are searching for is a life that is true to themselves and creative in however they define that. But you have to be
Absolutely.
present in order to realize that.
Right, right. And to follow the leads, whether it's that intuitive hit, or the thing that terrifies you. We are all by nature creative beings. That's how we are. And there was a time when I would have told you, I don't have a creative bone in my body. you won't hear me utter that anymore, because I create a lot, whether it's, creating your household, your home, your meals, your relationships, like everything we do. It's not just art. It's not just writing. It's not just, a business. It is how we operate on a day-to-day level. And I think there's this, again, fear of failure when we put too big a word on it. It's like creating. Oh my God, that's terrifying. What if I fail? So yeah, the creation is really important, and living, pushing those edges. It's not until you push the edges and continue to grow that you really start to get a sense of who you are as a person and what you're capable of. It's easy to sit in your comfort zone. It's really easy to sit and, do things the way you've always done them, which is fine if you have no desire to experience, I don't want to say experience life because that sounds so big, but um, life is so, I found that after being on this personal growth journey and getting really curious about myself and what I'm capable of and what interests me and what I'm passionate about, yes, there have been terrifying moments in my life, but as I've worked through those, it is one of the most, I mean, I get chills talking about it, the most beautiful things that you can experience when you realize how beautiful life is and how much there is to explore and understand and experience. But we need to take the initiative and choose that. Otherwise, yes, you can have a fine life. If you want a fine life, that's fine. If you want something where you're really experiencing it and out there living, that's a different story. And that requires pushing those edges
So
for sure.
choose terror, right?
Yeah. I don't want to say terror because that makes it sound like, but yeah, I think it's especially, those little signs, those things that's like, oh my God, I could never do that. Oh, what if you did? What if you made that phone call? What if you, asked that question? What if you said, you know what, I want to change tables? Is that okay?
Well, people talk about imposter syndrome, and I think that's an inherent part of the learning process. You
Yeah,
have to you have to take a step forward before you have a clue where your foot is going to land.
exactly.
And people kind of associate imposter syndrome with younger people. I don't think that's true at all.
No, not at
I
all.
think it's just part of the human learning cycle.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I would agree.
And you create as you go.
Yes.
I think sometimes being a little lost, what's the wonderful old quote? All who wander are not lost. I always like that quote. But I think sometimes being a little lost is a-okay.
I agree with you. And I think I've become very comfortable in the liminal space from between where I've been and where I'm going. In fact, I'm in a big one right now where, I had been running my business and really enjoying it and had my clients, and I put out a blog every week for 3 years, which, as you know, is quite a bit of work. And I got to a point earlier this year where I thought, I'm kind of bored with me. Like what I'm saying, it just felt like I was, saying the same thing over and over again. And while I'm still passionate about the importance of women in midlife, from the time I started my business to now, it has really become a saturated, which is good because Lord knows women need support, particularly around this area. But I found myself thinking, okay, now what's next for me? How do I take what I've learned from this experience and and explore other ways to apply my learnings and my experience on a bigger stage or in another way? And so that's what I've spent this last I don't know, 9 months, six to 9 months really kind of exploring. And there's a lot of downtime in that, right? There's a lot of
Mhm.
times where it's just like, because we are taught that in order to be successful, you must be productive. So when you're not producing and producing and producing, you can start to feel like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? But that liminal space is important because that's also when your intuitive hits start to come. It's in the quiet and it's kind of gives you the space to explore and to get curious with what comes next.
How do you teach people to be still in a world that is mesmerized by every external electronic bauble that exists?
It takes a desire to do it. It takes discipline. I am a very disciplined person, and I recognize not everybody is, but I also believe it takes a commitment to yourself. There are plenty of times I've had conversations with women who have come to work with me, and there are times when we get to a spot and they were stating what they wanted, their desire, their objective, their goal of our work together, but yet their actions weren't in alignment with that. And so that was my job as a coach, was to call them out and say, hey, you say you want this, but you're not doing the work to get there. So I think there's a lot of accountability, personal accountability, that we need to take if we say, you know what, I want my life to be different. I want to do something differently, is to commit that time. For some people, I mean, as little as 10 minutes a day. When I first started uh, really kind of dreaming up my business, the nonprofit, I had two young kids and I was racing around, taking them to school, volunteering, doing all the things. And the only time that I could find to sit down and really think about what comes next, and I just sit down and write, was in the morning before they got up. Well, I got a cup of coffee and I literally had 10 to 15 minutes and I would just sit there and write whatever came up for me. And over time, a picture started to form. And I realized that what I was really inspired by were children making a difference in the world. And that was what it took to set the intention and create the space for that. If you keep doing what you're doing, you're going to keep getting what you're getting. And so shifting the way our actions we take, our intentions as we take them, and how we show up in the world takes effort and it takes work and it takes time. So I would say, for somebody who's sitting there thinking, okay, I don't have time. Well, it's like, okay, I can't help you then. You got to make the time, because, and it's easier said than done. I think I can say this easily now, but making yourself a priority, particularly for women, is very, very challenging, right? Because we've basically grown up and been taught that everybody else comes first. And so I realize that that is a big shift in consciousness of, okay, what would happen? I dealt with this a lot. I feel selfish. People will call me selfish because I'm taking time away for myself. It's absolutely critical that we do that. And so making it a priority is important.
If you could pass along three pieces of wisdom for people in these liminal spaces, going through change, wondering what to do with their lives, what would you tell them?
I would tell them, one, be patient, two, be curious, and three, create that time for silence, whether it's, stillness, whether it's 10 minutes in the morning, whether it's meditation, um, journaling, going on a walk by yourself. One of the things I think is where I get a lot of my inspiration and a lot of my answers is by walking. I never wear AirPods. I never listen to a book on tape. I'm never chatting with a friend. I just go and I am really present to what's going on around me, whether it's the birds. Um, I also have this thing where I see stains on the sidewalk and sometimes they look like things and I take pictures. I take pictures of, water on the spider webs after a rain. Like, being really present helps get you into that meditative state. And I find that so much of my best work happens when I'm on my walks in the morning. So if that's the least you can do, just unplug from everything and just pay attention to what's going on around you. It's incredibly inspiring.